Well, thank you, Rangan. I submitted these slides to the group here, to the Dandelion gang. I then had a call with Mark Wynn on Skype, and he tells me, we're going through the presentation, and I'm quite pleased with my slides. And he seemed to be fairly pleased. And at the end of the call, he says, well, and don't forget to tell your story. I'm like, what? Yeah, you got to connect with the audience with your personal story, is sort of how you got into this and the moment that you sort of knew what you needed to do, and it helps people get to know you better. So I sort of left the call, have spent the last week thinking about what that story might be, and I'm ashamed to say I don't have much to tell you. Aside from the fact, the only thing I can think of that's particularly unique about is that manage health differently. And more recently, I've been doing this with large employers in the United States to try and manage health from perspective. So I have this idea that I just see over and over in work in healthcare in the US, which is that the structures we live in dictate the behaviors of the people inside it. And nowhere is this more true than in the world of healthcare. The way people are the way healthcare is purchased, the way doctors are compensated, the way regulations are shaped, have an amazing effect on the behavior of both the provider as well as the patient in the healthcare setting. And the idea that you have the opportunity to sort of author and shape and craft your own structures is just super exciting to me. So I'm very, very excited to be here for that reason. So I'm going to share with you really only three ideas. They're a little bit disjointed, but they're the three that come to mind for me as the most important in setting off on the journey to 100. So the first is, I have fun with this one. I like to describe it as a riddle. It's probably the simplest and the most actionable of the three concepts that we'll talk about. So the riddle goes like this. Here you see the cost of computing power, equivalent to that of an iPad 2, since, the 1940s. And it's just in this downward trajectory that you see. It's so consistent, it's been given the name Moore's Law. So about every 18 months or so, computing power doubles, costs fall in half. Really, really predictable reflection of the way our investment in innovation yields efficiency. Here we see the cost of solar energy and another graph depicting the cost of the technologies associated with creating solar energy since the 1980s. Steep downward sloping graph. Here we see, in the realm of healthcare, the cost of sequencing the human genome since 2001, as we've gotten like 100,000x efficiency out of investment in this particular niche in healthcare, plotted against Moore's Law, just to show you how much more rapidly we're gaining efficiencies in this area of medicine than we have in computer science. Here we see a graph depicting globally, roughly, the average cost per capita of maintaining the health of the human population at a steady, some would say even declining rate. And so herein lies a riddle. And in some respects, it may be the grandest riddle of our generation, certainly a riddle very relevant to you all here. And as I've kind of thought about this, and certainly in the US we hear this sort of debate all the time as to what is it that's driving the unsustainable cost of healthcare. And you'll hear everything from, the unit cost of healthcare is too high, doctors make too much, malpractice insurance costs too much, the cost of pharmaceuticals is too high, lots and lots of things, none of which are trivial, but certainly none of these things can explain how the graph in healthcare, even when we're seeing the yield of investment and efficiency in something like gene sequencing, can look like this, where everything else goes down. Everywhere else in our exponential economy, investment and innovation yields efficiency, except in our largest industry. So how can you explain this? And so to me, the answer to this riddle comes down to something very fundamental, which basically is the way that we, define health itself. We define health as the freedom of symptoms, irrespective of what measures we have to take to maintain this delusion of health. And as long as we're content to define health as the mere absence of symptoms, I would propose that we are creating, and will always live in, a model where innovation only yields more expense. Take as an example, a person like me, I haven't been to the doctor, let's just say, in several years. I don't miss work, on no medications. One day I go to the doctor, I have my checkup, and they say, oh gosh, Tom, your cholesterol is going up. Don't worry, I have some Lipitor, take this, all will be well. I comply with my medication regimen, my cholesterol numbers come back into check, my doctor and I then would agree probably that I've been restored to health. I go back next year, now it's my blood pressure. Here's some lisinopril, I comply, my blood pressure comes back into check, numbers are good, restored to health. Then it's my blood sugar, then it's something else. Then the things I'm taking begin to interact with one another to create yet another symptom. And so I take something else, and I'm restored to health. And you understand where this is going. The delusion of health as the mere absence of symptoms is a recipe for chronic, maybe even exponential escalation of cost. So I say this is an actionable, simple thing to deal with. Rangan mentioned I do an awful lot of work in the realm of what's called functional medicine. So functional medicine, very simply, and I'm not going to dwell on this because you'll hear lots of stories of it today, is simply the reorientation of providers and patients away from this model of symptom suppression medicine toward finding and addressing the underlying causes of dysfunction and resolving those underlying causes together at the level of the cause and not the effect. And what you find is that while it's a front-loaded investment, very analogous to this concept of weed eating in your garden with technology versus investing the extra effort to pull things up by the root, in the end it yields a great deal more efficiency. It's trainable. You all are revisiting your primary care model here. It's very accessible knowledge and something that I would propose should be sort of the underlying operating system of the primary care system that seeks to create the outcome that you're seeking to create. Now, my second concept, personal responsibility. Now, anytime you talk to people responsible for managing the cost of population health, personal responsibility is the drum they like to beat. And I have to tell you, I have found this to be just an irritating topic, the way it's dealt with. And the reason for that is, well, let's establish something. Somebody asks you to be responsible for something, to take ownership of it. Would you or would you not agree that you can really only take that request seriously if you believe that you yourself have some control over that thing, yes? Okay, I agree. It's a pointless exercise to beat on someone to take responsibility for something they don't think they control. So in the area of personal responsibility, we have kind of two sides to this coin. There's personal responsibility for health, and there's personal responsibility for healthcare spending. These are the two topics that tend to come up when you're talking about responsibility with people underwriting the cost of care. Let's start with the topic of health. So, from probably the dawn of time when people began thinking about health, or more likely thinking about disease and what it means, until really very recently, there have been basically two stories of where disease comes from. The first story from way back when is disease it's either a matter of fortune, it's the wrath of God, you know, it's something completely out of your control. The second, more recently informed by our discovery of genetics, is that your health trajectory and your disease likelihood is scripted in your genetic hand. And so it's predestined or predetermined. In either case, regardless of which story you're talking about, one thing they share in common is you, the individual, have really no control over either. It's a matter of fortune or predetermination. The thing that's exciting about both recent scientific discovery, relatively recent scientific discovery, and I believe it's being carried forward and accelerated into mass application by the functional medicine movement, is yet a new story of health that, frankly, in my opinion, is the preface to any campaign on personal responsibility where health is concerned. And fortunately for me, Michelle touched on this. And it's this idea that in fact, we're shifting from an era in medicine call it an era of predeterminism, into an era of self-determinism. And it looks something like this. I have a 14-year-old son, Zachary. He has two twin friends who've been coming to the house forever. They're clones, and I cannot tell the two of them apart. If you've ever known little twins, they look a lot alike. They're genetically identical. But what we find is, as we age, these twins become different. If you look at them, the two here are two women that were in a smoking study. The only difference between them is the one on the right smoked, the other did not. Now, of course, they had a host of other differences in their lives by this point. But what you see is certainly their genetics haven't changed, but their appearance has become different. They've become different. As Michelle just said, their genes have expressed themselves in entirely different ways, creating two completely different health trajectories. And so what we find is that where once in the old story of health we thought that our health was predestined, scripted in our genetic hands, and out of our control, what we now know today is that the great majority of our health, call it about 80%, is arising from the interaction between things very much within our control and our genetics. And so if 80% or thereabout of our health arises from things within our control, then you must conclude that health is a skill. And so if health is a skill, this carries forward all kinds of implications to the Journey to 100 campaign. Now let's shift over for a moment to the concept of cost. So in the United States, we've been shifting the burden of healthcare cost onto the shoulders of consumers for a long time, in recent years, at least the last decade, in the form of higher and higher deductibles. And we've been asking consumers, by virtue of this responsibility, to behave as more economically rational consumers of healthcare services. We've done it too soon and without putting the right structures into place. Number one, most Americans, as most people, still live in one of the old stories of health. And so, number one, they don't think health is well within their control. But number two, we haven't created an environment where you can see either the price or the quality of what it is that you're buying. And so if you want consumers to behave as rational consumers, you have to reveal to them the price and the quality in a way that's accessible to us in the context of everything else that we buy. Now, I'll touch on this topic of linking behavior and economics, because in different marketplaces and in different cultures, this can be a sensitive topic. I would simply submit to you this. In the new story of health, where health is something that you actually can control, I wonder if a healthcare finance structure that detaches the consumer from the cost or the savings associated with creating or destroying health is one that is likely to extract the maximum potential of that universe of people. I would submit that the linkage economically between behavior and the cost of care is actually a really important one to driving forward the objective of longevity and sustainability in a healthcare system. There are lots of ideas around how you might do this, one of which, I'll only touch on one, and I would love it if this kind of came out in the work that's being done here, is one concept. Number one, well, two concepts. You have to, of course, protect the population. I'm not suggesting for a moment that people be left on their own. Protecting the population is a critical core value. But here's the key. The idea that in many places a bottle of water costs more than a can of Coke is insane. And if you have the opportunity to simply, as I say, tax toxic products to the extent that the consumption of those products at least pays for the health mayhem that those products create, you will have done a spectacular thing. Now, I understand in talking to Roger today that sales tax isn't a welcome idea here. I would love if you would consider just opening your mind to this one particular type of sales tax as a way to fund healthcare, health innovation, care for people who can't necessarily afford it. My last concept, community. And this one I'll touch on really very briefly. In the U.S., we're all required by law since 2010 to buy health insurance. Most people don't know that there is a little exemption to that, which is, it's a religious exemption that says if you're part of a cost-sharing community, you're exempt from the mandate to buy insurance. You don't have to pay a penalty. A couple of years ago, I had an interesting opportunity to enter into this little world and create a product on the chassis of a cost-sharing community that was really deeply integrated and interwoven with a particular type of primary care. It turned out to be a spectacular experience. The product works beautifully. I myself use it to insure my family, and the costs haven't changed in the 3 years since we've been involved with it. So our monthly premiums that we pay into this have remained unchanged, which compared to what we've seen elsewhere in the U.S. is hardly anything short of miraculous. The concepts, I've tried to tease these apart. Why is this possible? And I've thought of three things, the first of which is sort of sciencey. It's the concept that the chairman of the Institute for Functional Medicine, a guy called Mark Hyman, has dubbed social genomics, I think really accurately. And so it plays off of a piece of research done from the Framingham Heart Research cohort, where they looked at the effect of social networks on health. And what they found is that taking something like obesity, although it had to do with all sorts of different things, if my friend is obese, I have a 45% greater chance of being obese myself. If my friend's friend is obese, 25% chance myself, increased chance of being obese. If my friend's friend's friend is obese, 10% increased chance, which revealed this idea that cultures and communities are actually the carriers in many ways of either health or disease in the chronic disease sense. And to me, really creates a scientific and quantitative basis for the importance of community. The second idea, community, when it really is done this way around financing healthcare, activates something I think is a rather innate in our wiring, which is this law of reciprocity. If I do something for you, you're more likely to do something for me, which then multiplies again when we're dealing with managing costs and sort of stewardship of finances, which is to say I'm way less likely in a community of people sharing the burden of healthcare costs to behave irresponsibly, financially. The last thing is that communities, I have discovered, I think, activate maybe the most innate form of charity in our hard wiring, which is this concept of mutual aid, which if you sort of follow the history of charity, whether it's immigrant communities supporting one another, religious communities in the case of cost sharing, the concept of mutual aid, at least in the US, has been largely extinguished by welfare and commercial insurance. But it's something very real, and when you activate it, it's powerful. And so this then brings me to my sort of concluding thought, which is, what is in fact the characteristic of community? And I just made this up from my own observation, so I don't pretend for a moment this is definitive. But in a community, you basically have people that are in some way connected or aligned. Could be by geography. Everyone lives here on this island, or everyone works in a place, or everyone has sort of bound together around a value system or a religion. The people are empowered. Literally, in the cost-sharing program that we were developing, there was a democracy about changing policy on this. So they would vote on what we were or were not going to cover. So there's an unbelievable degree of empowerment. We then informed the membership. How much are we spending? How are we doing? There's a feedback cycle that was transparent. And then there was mutual accountability, not only through the law of reciprocity, but through the mutual accountability of holding the administrators accountable to how much they were spending, how much they were making. Everything was on the table. You activate these four things, and incredible things can happen in terms of the economic stewardship of the program. So that concludes my thoughts. I could think of no other way to sort of sign off than to say Godspeed on this journey to 100, and thank you very much.